Hello, everyone, and welcome to your second breakout session of the day, utilizing data to help your team improve processes. My name's John Monroe, and I'm the Director of Content here at GovLoop, and for this session, I'm also your moderator. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you caught our lunch sessions, especially the NextGen Awards ceremony. I'm kind of prejudiced about this. I helped work on the awards booklet, and I got to talk to some of the winners, and I found their stories so inspiring. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, be sure to check it out on demand. We also heard great presentations, one on how employees assess their managers, which was very provocative and very useful, and another one on how to create a psychologically safe team. Again, if you missed these, be sure to check them out on demand. But now we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about improving work processes. We'll talk about what data can help, how to use that data to gain insight into your challenges, and then use that data again to drive change. But before we get to that great content, I want to go over some housekeeping items. First, if you're on Twitter, please share what you learned. Just use the hashtag NextGenGov. We have some great resources available for you to download. You can find those in the resource module on the right-hand side of your console, so be sure to check those out. If you want to access the closed captioning feature, just look for the icon at the bottom right-hand side of the media player. We hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but if you do, just send us a message through that Q&A tab, and my colleague Kelly will help you out. You can use that same tab to submit questions to our speaker, and we want your questions, so please don't be shy. You can also engage with your fellow attendees. Just look for that blue group chat button in the middle of your panel. Click on that, and you'll be able to join the conversation. And just so you know, we are recording this event, and tomorrow we'll email you a link so that you can catch up on any of the sessions you missed or share it with a colleague. And then finally, I want to let you know that we are giving out 1 CPE credit for your participation in today's session. To get that credit, you need to do 3 things. Take the polls, participate in the entire session, and then finally fill out the post-event evaluation. And that evaluation form can be found in the resource module on the console, or you can go to the resource center in the main environment. And so we'll email you the CPE directly to you once we've confirmed that you've met all those requirements. All right, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce you to our expert. Joining us is Megan Huss. Megan is the Director of the Process and Performance Improvement Program at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. She leads the development of process and performance improvement capabilities in public sector organizations, and she does that through training, workshops, and project-based learning initiatives. And of course, data is a big part of that. Megan has held many leadership roles during her 15 years with OPM, focusing on such areas as organizational change and transformation, workforce and succession management, strategy and business planning, as well as operations management. So she clearly knows her stuff. And so without further ado, Megan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. So today we'll be focusing on talking about utilizing data to help your team improve processes. As John had mentioned, my name is Megan Huss. I'm the Director of OPM's Process and Performance Improvement Program, and we place a heavy emphasis on helping our partner federal agencies really focus on building this improvement capability and capacity within their own organization. So we do that through a number of channels and training and facilitating workshops, executing project-based learning. And we're really excited to be able to help shift time and energy away from those low-value tasks and low-value activities to our high-value, more intellectually engaging actions and initiatives. So as I mentioned in this session, we're focused on supporting you as supervisors and managers, really focused on improving the efficiency and effectiveness of your team's processes, but then also giving you some of the tools and techniques on how to teach some of them how they can go about kind of improving their own processes within the teams and organizations. So with that, we'll get started with the objectives for today. We're going to move through a few areas, and one is really identifying types of data. So taking a look at the types of data that may be available or that we may want to focus on collecting in the future. Then moving into how we can start unpacking and uncomplicating that data. We can use a tool such as stratification, often referred to as slicing the data. And then actually moving into learning some key steps and some of the key methodologies that we use for improving processes and how we can pull data into those steps and those elements. Then we'll move into a bit more of a deeper dive into the qualitative and quantitative data, as well as how we apply the data analysis to our actual process improvements and how we can leverage that available data or design projects and research around what types of data we may be able to utilize to then make those informed decisions. So the slide number 3 here is just a high-level breakout of what we commonly see as our broad data categories. So we typically use these to just kind of start the data analysis process, start to assess what types of data we're looking at. So as you'll see here, initially data is broken into 2 main categories. One of them is the quantitative data, the other being the qualitative data. So if we think about this at the highest level, we can think about qualitative data as something that we may have to classify or make a judgment on in kind of pushing that to a particular category or area, whereas quantifiable data often focuses on the number, the numerical value that data actually has. So looking at this, we can further break down our quantitative data into discrete and attribute data. You'll hear those terms used interchangeably. Sometimes you'll hear one, not the other. So we've grouped them here today. But as an example, this might be a count or a total of something that we're looking at. So this could be maybe the total number of customers served. That could be internally looking within your organization. It could be an external focus on those customers outside your organization. Another common example that's frequently talked about now is maybe the number of staff that are onboarded or a number of individuals that are going through applying for various positions. So we could even think about this on the personal side. How many people are in our families? How many pets in our household? So we would typically say this is a specific or discrete number, such as 2 or 3. We wouldn't be referring to the 2.3 pets, for example, that we would have. So it's a good way to think about the difference of discrete and attribute data versus continuous data, which is really where we're focused on the continuum, or kind of measuring something that can be continuously divided into lower level parts that are still recognizable in and of those pieces. So for example, something that we frequently use would be time, or it could be dollars, weight, height, those sorts of things, where we can continue to divide that into lower numbers, lower levels. Things that we use in the process improvement area, for example, in this particular category would be cycle times. So how long it takes to get from step A to step B. And if that time is acceptable, looking at this from the category of the customer as well as the voice of the business. And then really examining other ways that we might consider utilizing this type of data. So we can think about maybe the cost or price associated with a particular initiative, the length of a call, thinking about temperature kind of on that continuum and that scale. So there's a number of ways that we utilize all these types of data within process improvement initiatives, and that you're probably familiar with utilizing them in your personal lives as well on a daily basis. So then as we jump over to qualitative data, I just wanted to spend a minute on talking about kind of nominal versus ordinal types of data. So if we think about nominal, those variables don't necessarily have an inherent order or kind of that specific quantitative value. So for example, assigning something to categories that we've created and that we're interpreting as right or wrong, or those things that may be in categories of true or false, but that could require a level of interpretation. This is similar to, for example, gender or race. We also have then ordinal variables, and this is actually a specific ordered series. So for example, if we say that the letter grades A through F are options on the outcome for an individual attending a college course, then those would be considered ordinal variables. Another example of this category could be something like our education levels. So quantifying those in a way that is a specific discrete category that it would be grouped into. So with that, we will move into our first engagement question of the day. And that question is, which type of data can we use to support process improvements? Our options are qualitative data, quantitative data, or both. And we'll give you just a minute to be able to take a look at that question and click your responses. And again, it looks like we have a few folks that have responded, but that question is, what type of data can be actually used to support our process improvement efforts? Qualitative data, quantitative data, or both? All right, it looks like we had almost 97% of the audience recognizing that there is critical value in both categories of data. So we really appreciate you weighing in and kind of recognizing that. And as we move through this, I'll encourage you to consider that there are times that it's more appropriate and kind of easier or quicker to get to specific types of data. And so depending on the cost, the timeline, what the overall objectives are for your improvement initiatives may help to drive or determine which type of data is more effective or a better choice for you to use in any given initiative. So moving on to the next slide of data stratification, we want to talk a little bit about this because it's another way that we can help to unpack sometimes what's considered complex or unwieldy amounts of data. And this is a way that we can take a look at really what types of questions. So a way to further break down our data and what we're looking at in terms of stratification factors. So taking a look at this, as I mentioned, we often call this slicing and dicing the data. And it's really a lens that we use to look at the data through. So it's critical that we identify those stratification factors and really the way that we want to analyze and use the data as early and kind of upfront as we can. So we really focus on the process outputs, or what we often call the Y, as opposed to the x-axis, and looking for those clues and those root causes, and kind of utilize this as a way to verify or continue to unpack and uncover what some of those challenges, the root causes are within your process improvements. So looking at this is another way to kind of examine how we drill into and really focus on what we would consider those vital or precious few elements rather than kind of the trivial many. So it allows us to surface those patterns or further investigate some elements of our data. So if we think about kind of how we want to go about this, one of the reasons that it's critical to actually take a look at the question that you're asking, shape the problem appropriately and the challenge and the potential opportunity for improvement on the front end is because without those stratification factors, without recognizing or attempting to uncover the hypotheses that we might want to test, we actually would then end up collecting a significant amount more data on the back end because we can't build those in if they're lacking in our data. So just thinking about if we're utilizing an existing data set versus if we're actually going out maybe surveying or collecting staff information, if we're collecting the data, we really want to bake in those key stratification factors as early on as we can. The other thing to consider with that, though, is that we don't want to include so many that our surveys, that our data collection method becomes unwieldy. So really thinking about those most critical elements of slicing the data that would help lead to additional insights and support our ability to actually make those data-driven decisions. So looking at ways that we can stratify the data and just using a few examples, thinking about maybe the complaints or defects in a process, or looking at something like, we have some examples here of the types of errors. So rather than just knowing that there's errors created, in order to really get to the root of the issue and start to devise solutions that might address that, we need to know more about why those errors are occurring. Is it because it's a particular day of the month when staff have a significant amount more work going on for their month-end close? Or is it something in a particular region because maybe a meeting is set at a specific time that isn't as ideal for many of these staff, and they may be attending other meetings? And so really diving into, is this a department-wide issue? Is this something that's happening individually? And trying to unpack that and thinking about how we can look at that data through various lenses that might help us gain additional insights. So our next question of the day is, which of the following is a common reason to use data stratification? So we just talked about one of the reasons that we actually use this as a common tool, but we wanted to investigate further kind of why we might use this in process improvement efforts. So your options are, the first, illustrating the process through a process map. Second, sorting data into categories to reveal patterns and trends. The third is combining multiple data sets into one large complex data set. And the last option is controlling the process after improvements have been made.
And while people are answering that, I just want to remind everyone that we got kind of two tools for engagement for you. If you want to submit a question, just look for that Q&A, tab so you can submit a question to Megan. And also there's that attendee chat function. So if you want to, chat with your fellow attendees, that's the place to do that. So, feel free to join the conversation.
Thanks, John. So it looks like we have about half the attendees submitted their responses. So we'll give it just a few more seconds and then we'll move to the answer here. But the question is, which of the following are common reasons, or which of the following is a common reason to use data stratification? All right. We are going to move on to the responses. So we have a few varied responses here. We have a few folks that weighed in on illustrating the process through a process map. Then we have the majority of individuals sorting data into categories to reveal patterns and trends. A couple folks combining the data sets, and then another individual with controlling the process after the improvements have been made. So the primary focus that we use data stratification for is actually to kind of use various lenses and to reveal those patterns and trends, gain additional insights from our data. If we're thinking about illustrating the process through a process map, there would be ways to kind of work this backwards, and after the stratification has occurred, really taking a look at the individual cycle times that we're then illustrating on a map. So I can see how a couple of folks would have weighed in there. But our primary focus with utilizing data stratification is to reveal those additional insights through various lenses that we may not have been kind of seeing as clearly, to get to the root cause of knowing maybe what was happening, but trying to unpack and understand the why it's happening. So on the next slide, you'll see utilizing data to improve processes. We've included a few steps here of a system that we commonly use for examining and how we approach and address process improvement. But one of the things before I get into this that I'd like to touch on is just a bit about kind of why we focus on data and why this is such an important thing that we utilize in both our personal and professional lives. And it goes back to kind of that poll question that we had just addressed with really understanding additional insights. So we're able to better understand our customers, thinking about both those internal customers, whether they're your teams, your staff within your organizations, or those external customers that may be recipients of the products or services that you provide, and helping to identify the inefficiencies that may exist, or how we might move a process through a cycle faster. And some would argue, how we're able to make better decisions on those improvements, on those solutions that we would eventually end up testing and piloting. So really utilizing data to kind of target and unpack not only the notional kind of brainstorming side of what we think might be happening, but actually taking a look at what the data is telling us in terms of the cycle times and the handoffs and where those bottlenecks might be occurring. So we don't need to be data scientists to really be able to analyze and utilize data. But an important component of responsibly using the data is actually the assessment with looking at, whether this data has been cleaned, kind of what the parameters were around the data collection, and really understanding the context that the data sits within. So now we're going to move into a bit of a deeper dive into looking at how we can actually move through this process and move through these 5 steps of utilizing data. So we've included defining. So really spending time up front thinking about what we're trying to measure and asking ourselves why we want to measure that, why we want to engage in a particular research topic. What challenge are we trying to address? What problem are we trying to solve? So that we're really targeting the data that's collected in the most efficient manner, and that we're responsibly reporting that and analyzing it based on the context that is available. And moving into measuring those key data points throughout the process. So taking a look at, oftentimes we have a variety of outcomes throughout our processes and a variety of touch points that are certainly worthy of being not only assessed in kind of a one-time picture, but also looking at what those cycle times look like across time and trends. And then improving, moving into analyzing the data to gain those insights that we had discussed, and then improving the processes by using the data to drive those changes. So taking a look at, what the voice of the customer is telling us, what the voice of the business is telling us, what the voice of the process is telling us, and then really looking across that spectrum and identifying those most critical points that we would then want to move forward with, because it would most likely be the most effective solutions implemented. And then the last step, really controlling and monitoring that data so that we're able to maintain those improvements. And one of the reasons that it's often referred to as continuous process improvement is because we don't ever kind of want to shelve something that we got it to its, in quotes, perfect point, and that we can always look towards continuously improving and continuously examining different ways that we actually go about not only improving the process on the initial front-end side, but also maintaining those gains and then continuing to assess if this is in fact the most effective route, because we know that we don't want to just make kind of all processes or all things, faster or maybe done more efficiently, but we really want to focus on the effectiveness outcome as well. Is this achieving those larger scale objectives and strategies that we're trying to support? So with that, we will move into our next engagement question, which is, what is the first step to follow when trying to improve a process? So we have 4 options here. using data analysis to guide improvements, implementing improvements and measuring data points again, determining what needs to be measured, and then accurately measuring the whole process.
And Megan, maybe while people are answering that, we have a couple questions from attendees. One is there a way to avoid developing questions or data sets that contribute to our bias, or that tell the desired story as opposed to telling, the true story? How would you respond to that?
Absolutely. So that's a great question, because that is kind of the dark side of data, if you will, and the analysis. And that this is one of the critical components of understanding, assessing, and then reporting out the kind of the context that the data sits within as well, so that we're not going out collecting data to support individual theories, but rather we're taking as unbiased approach as possible in collecting the data, understanding, getting to the root cause of what the actual issue is, and then holding off on those proposed solutions and proposed potential pilots until we are able to see kind of what the voice of the customer, the business, the process is all telling us. So that's a great point, in that we certainly need to exercise caution in the development of a few things. One is the metrics. One is the data collected. If we're actually reporting out that this is representative of a particular sector, or we're stratifying the data in a particular way, that we're actually taking a responsible look at how that data was collected, and then the attributions that were and insights that we're actually able to glean from it.
Excellent. All right. Thank you.
And so with that, we will move to our response of kind of what is the initial first step that we take in our process improvement efforts. And one of the first things that we take a look at is kind of what needs to be measured in this process that I had just talked about. So thinking through how we want to go about collecting the data, and really what question, what challenge we're trying to address and what we're trying to solve there. So making sure that either the research or the project that we're engaging in is actually addressing that core issue or that core challenge. So in this initial phase, defining what we're actually measuring that I had just talked about, we want to make sure that we're setting this up to be a data-driven continuous process improvement within your teams. So focusing on not only kind of maybe what your ideas are and what you would like to measure, but ensuring that we're talking with our team members and our staff about what they're seeing, because there's often insights that they have that we wouldn't necessarily have just from our initial assessments. So talking that through, really sitting with what the challenge is, understanding how we can embrace that, how we can set that up as a potential opportunity area for improvement, and then coming together to identify what those future metrics would be. So if we talk about the example I had used earlier with a goal of increasing customer satisfaction or potentially decreasing hiring timelines, we could think about what metrics would be most appropriate for that. Would that be an assessment of our customer experience or their customer satisfaction survey scores? It could be something like assessing the timelines from the point of initial application of an individual to when someone is actually onboarded in that seat. So thinking through what we actually want to measure and kind of the reasons for doing so, what that data would tell us about those future improvements. So our next question is, voice of the customer and voice of the business can both be used to define what data to measure. Voice of the customer and voice of the business can both be used to define what data that we would like to measure. So is this true or false?
And maybe while people are answering that, we have another question. and that is, if there's no known baselines, what influence, if any, does this have on defining what we need to measure? What do you say?
So that's a great question as well. And oftentimes, where we find ourselves currently in government is designing new processes rather than just simply improving those that previously existed. So in those cases, we often don't have baseline timelines to work from. So excellent question. One of the things that we like to address is, as we kind of break down that overarching process, is how were individual subcomponents conducted in the past. And if it's not something that's been done in the past, thinking about what our overarching strategy is for designing and for actually implementing that process to begin with. So making sure this rolls up to our overarching strategy, our objectives, and then helping that to drive what our actual metrics are and how we're defining success. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities there. And oftentimes what we'll see is, as we design new processes, as we establish new programs, new organizations, some of the metrics that we may have initially defined are not as relevant or not as telling as something that we may uncover as we move into the implementation, or as we've had a pilot opportunity with the particular project or process. So I think that's always an important thing to consider, is that we have the opportunity to change those metrics and to actually, unpack what would be the most effective way to measure those specific outcomes. So kind of continuously revisiting, are we getting the answers that we need to be able to tell us how to improve this? Or the other side of it is, are we actually assessing what those most critical outcomes are for each of us? And so we'll move into, I think we have the majority of our attendees responding, and everyone, a resounding 100%, with voice of the customer and voice of the business both being really important to help define what we measure. So thinking about kind of, if you will, what those demands are from various stakeholder groups and from various components, including our process. So there's going to be elements of a process, whether that be system-based or because it's organization-based, that we can only go so fast. And so really identifying some of those parameters and those restrictions that we might have, so that we can take that into the assessment of the metrics and the actual objectives, targets that we're aiming for. So we move into the second element of measuring our data in the process. So taking a look at what our actual goal is, and then gathering the data in a way that is most appropriate for that. As we had talked about earlier, there are some times that we may, in fact, already have data and large data sets available to kind of dive into. There's other times that we will actually be collecting this. So thinking through, if we're on the design side and the actual collection side, what's the best way that we can eliminate potential human error? Well, that would be through automation. Sometimes that's feasible, sometimes it's not. It could be as simple as automating an intake assessment form, or things along those lines that don't take in-depth coding and in-depth systems, but more so because it is actually bringing in information through a system, we eliminate those opportunities for human error. Then we also really need to take a look at ensuring that the data is accurate. So whether that be through an automated system as we're bringing it in, or through individuals kind of incorporating and doing the data entry and that side, and really taking a look at testing various points throughout the data and ensuring that that we are, in fact, kind of seeing what we would expect to see. And if not, pushing that further and doing additional tests. That's not to say that the data is necessarily going to align with all assumptions. However, as we do these tests, we're able to kind of build out the individual components of it to test to make sure that something wasn't miscoded, or that we haven't, in fact, had inaccurate data entry. So we're able to, as I mentioned, utilize things like cycle time. Sometimes it's important for us to take a look at the distribution or even the process capability or lead times that various teams or organizations require, so that we're building those requirements in and understanding what that process will actually look like with the various requirements from different stakeholder groups. So now we're moving into analyzing the data and really taking a look at what some of the tools that we have available to us are. So the example that I pulled here today, I know that we've had a number of different organizations, whether you're just starting out on your process improvement journey, or this is something that a mindset that you really embrace. I think we're able to kind of share this with our teams and our staff as a tool to really put on a different hat and look at an issue or a problem through various lenses. So this particular tool called an Ishikawa is something that we commonly use in looking at the root causes of what might be going on. So one of the reasons that we use that is that it has a way of balancing the ideas that are generated or the thoughts around challenges that are occurring and issues that we're seeing, and really force us to look at this through various lenses. So for example, we might be heavily focused on looking at the particular challenge, whether that be the hiring timeline, solely through the people lens, whereas we're not considering what some of the metrics that are being used are, the impact of the financial resources available to a particular organization. It could be something related to policies and procedures that are currently in place that we would not have taken a look at because that wasn't something that maybe came up in a focus group. But by putting that category on paper and kind of encouraging everyone to come together, brainstorm, think around a particular area and a particular lens, we're able to unpack some of those additional ideas that we didn't previously have. So it's really that opportunity to kind of ask each other and ask of our challenge or of our problem, why is this happening? And then kind of continuing to ask that why through these various lenses in Ishikawa. So the next question that we have is, an Ishikawa diagram can be used as an analysis tool to sort and relate the factors affecting a process. Is that true or false?
Yeah, let's see, there's another question here. Are there any automated programs that you would recommend for analyzing data? Any good tools out there?
So there are a host of tools, and I think it's somewhat dependent on how in depth you want to go. Like we have statistical packages like SPSS that we use in the industrial organizational psychology world. We also have a tool called Minitab that's frequently used in process improvement because it has a lot of the analyses built in and makes it fairly easy to run some of those quick diagnostics and do the analyses that we're looking for to then potentially develop those solutions. There's also a number of additional kind of add-on features that products like Microsoft have come out with. So just for example, additional add-on packs for Excel that can be utilized to run a number of these statistical analyses now. So I think there's a host of options out there available. And one of the things that I think that we try to focus on and teach as well is kind of embracing the tools that we do have available. And I know that looks different for each of our federal organizations, but really taking a look at what options might be available that we're not even utilizing yet. So for example, the Excel option that we're beginning to work with other agencies on and helping them utilize that because it is so much more commonly available than some of these other statistical packages.
I want to mention one thing that's in chat, not for you to answer now, but maybe something that will come up later in your presentation. And that is, okay, so you've done analysis, you've produced a report. How does that actually translate into, say, policy change? How do you get from paper to, to actual change? So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Great, thank you. So we will be sure to address that. And if I forget, please remind me. So an Ishikawa diagram can be used as an analysis tool to sort and relate the factors affecting a process. And the majority of you all chose true, which is in fact correct. So we're able to kind of use this, as I mentioned, to look through different lenses and to really help shape and kind of drive the brainstorming, the idea generation through various perspectives that we may not have been utilizing previously. So moving into improving the process by using the data to drive those changes. Really taking a look at, so as John had mentioned, we've kind of gathered some data, we've analyzed it, maybe we've written a white paper on it, maybe we've done the research, provided the report out, but how do we actually utilize this to make the changes? So one of the ways that we're able to do this is through, for example, the cause and effect matrices or Pareto charts, which are often thought of as those bar charts, utilizing some of our visualization techniques to actually tell the story of what was taking place in the process, maybe what was transpiring related to the particular challenge or the opportunity for improvement that we had, and then articulating that in a way that's most applicable to the individual audience. So thinking about who we're kind of presenting this change to. Sometimes it's our team, it's our individual staff that we need to get on board with a new process, or that we need to really get buy-in to manage a particular initiative in a different manner. Sometimes it's larger scale, so it's related to, as you mentioned, the policy change. And so thinking about how we want to drive those changes and who our target audience is for each of those. So oftentimes we're able to utilize and do kind of pilot programs at a smaller scale. So sometimes those look like within a particular subcomponent or an organization in our agency. Sometimes they're at the agency level, and we've utilized pilots to say, okay, we've dug into the data, done the analyses, and we see that these particular points along the process are key failure points, or critical places of bottlenecks, or where the cycle time is too long. And so utilizing some of these improvements that have been generated within that agency, and then kind of using that to drive forward process changes and policy changes at a higher level. So really starting with that small pilot program and kind of working up to greater changes, but utilizing the data not only to develop the solutions and the ideas, but actually then to report out on the impacts of the pilot programs that have been run with those new solutions and with those improvements. So moving into the fifth component and looking at how we've actually utilized the data and how we've kind of went through the process of unpacking what it means, what the challenges are, but then moving into the actual implementation, some of the changes, improvements that we've been able to achieve and that we've seen. We also need to examine how we can kind of control and monitor this to really maintain and sustain those improvements, and then how we can use that to build on future improvements. So really taking a look at this from kind of the continuous life cycle, and that we would consistently want to revisit some of those challenges, some of those points that we've implemented pilot programs. It might be a matter of testing and trying a different solution, or it could be a different point of actually taking a look at how we can build on that. So maybe we've improved a particular process related to our hiring life cycle with a form and with particular elements that would be uploaded to a website, and maybe we move to a greater level of automation in that process and the approval state of our staffing plans on the front end, for example. So thinking through how we can move these improvements to the next generation and to actually see some of those results built on, or see some of those piloted solutions that may not have been as effective as expected, how we can pilot and work towards other solutions and continue to iterate and improve. So reviewing what we've talked about today, we've divided this into a few categories. One was really identifying our types of data. Sometimes this is where we actually have data that's given to us or that we're able to access. Other times it's where we're collecting the data from the start. So considering the different types of data that are available and really taking a look at what we can do with that data. Then we moved into talking about stratification and how we can use this and how we can really embrace that as a tool and technique to start to unpack and glean additional insights into not just the what's happening and the challenge, but actually the why it might be taking place. And then learning how we can improve those processes. So using a variety of steps from the first initial stage of defining through the actual stage of conducting and implementing the improvement, and then taking a look at how we can continuously revisit those improvements, build on them, or potentially expand the scope to a broader audience. So as I had mentioned earlier, in helping your team improve processes, there's a variety of methods and means that we can do this. One of the things that our team focuses on is partnering with other federal organizations to do this. And so we really value the ability to kind of address data and address challenges and issues, both at the very small scale, so it might be within an immediate team, as well as kind of spanning up to the larger, more strategic initiatives and challenges that our federal organizations are facing. So with that, I think that we have a couple of questions that I'm going to take a quick look at. Yeah, so that's a great question about kind of examining some of the assumptions that are baked in with qualitative and quantitative data and taking a look at the philosophical assumptions behind them. So I think that's a critical point and a really good question that was posed, because I think as the researcher and as the individual, not only kind of reporting out what the data told us, but also what our proposed recommendations are, whether that be for individual level process changes or, clear to the level of policy changes, is really reporting on those assumptions and taking a look at how we can share and convey the actual context of where the data was found and of kind of what the challenge we were looking at was, because there are a number of opportunities to kind of create categories that may in fact drive or convey a certain perspective that would be missing by not conveying other categories. And I think that's our responsibility as as data analysts or as individual improvement experts to really identify those assumptions, identify some of those areas that we may not have included data for that could be potential for future recommendations of research projects or of additional analysis and investigation.
Well, Megan, I have a question. I remember you once did a presentation on data and storytelling. And I wonder kind of where does that come in, to when you're really kind of, once you have that data, to what extent do you need to engage in some storytelling to help people really kind of absorb that data and understand, kind of what it might mean to them?
That's a really important component, I think, of this whole process is with just this short amount of time, we didn't have time to kind of dive too deep into the data storytelling. But I think that's an important component that we include in kind of what the challenge is, but then also using the visualization and using the narrative around kind of what the findings were, so that we're able to convey, and to this earlier question, actually convey what kind of what the data is telling us, but also some of those assumptions, some of those parameters that may have been utilized, and some of those elements of different components of the qualitative or the quantitative data that wasn't examined or that we didn't stratify, so that we're really sharing that whole picture in the way that we're conveying these proposed solutions, or kind of what the overall intended insights gained from the analysis clear through the implementation are.
Excellent. Let's see, another question from the audience, from attendees. Is it someone observed that, they collect data, but sometimes the numbers just don't seem to change much year to year, and they're trying to find ways to make a difference. What do you do when you're in that situation where, the data just seems it's just the needle isn't moving?
So I think one of the ways to kind of unpack that, there's a couple of methodologies, but one way to think about that is kind of where is the pain at, right? What stakeholder group is experiencing the greatest pain from that? And then start to unpack other underlying causes of that, other issues that might be going on, and then take a look at maybe what solutions have actually been implemented in the past, and then examine what that would look like in the future if different programs were piloted. So kind of exploring that, continuously unpacking what solutions have been implemented, because oftentimes when it is reported data, we do hear about various initiatives that kind of spun off from different data collection techniques and from different results that were shared. And so taking a look at, the impact of those actual initiatives, and then what other initiatives might be appropriate to explore, to continue to investigate. And then within that spectrum, also really giving a lot of key thought to the stakeholder groups that are impacted, and kind of outlining or shaping a paper or a recommended proposal through that lens, that maybe we've addressed one group of our key customers while leaving out another group of customers that we need to make sure that we're addressing as well.
All right, I want to kind of step back a bit. This is a question that comes up in our community a lot, and that is around data literacy. So, we're talking about, these kind of really important ways of using data. To what extent, do you see that agencies need to kind of focus on data literacy so that people get comfortable having these kinds of conversations, so that they can understand the value of what they're seeing?
So that's a great question. I think all of our agencies have continued to increase not only their kind of data literacy at the highest level, but also at the level of hiring additional data analysts, data scientists, having individual components within each of our organizations that address that. But really taking a look at kind of what it is that we need to understand better, and working back from that point, so that we're able to, there's so many kind of options these days, right? To take a quick 1-hour seminar, attend a quick webinar on, learning a little bit more about data. That there's the in-depth, going back to school, maybe completing a PhD in this area. So we have the whole gamut and the whole range of options in terms of training and development in this area. But I think one of the important points to consider is, what are we missing in individual agencies or individual components of organizations and agencies? What skills need to be further developed? What capacity do we need to build? And then really focus from that point of, what problem are we trying to solve? And then kind of move that direction with the training programs, with the partnerships that are created, so that we can hopefully address that in the near term.
All right. And just one last question, where I know we're running out of time, but what's sort of the one message that you want people to take away from this? If they're going to kind of go back to their team and say, hey, I attended this great session, what is it that you really want them to take away from this? What's kind of that key message?
I think the most important message would be that data does not have to be overly complex, and it does not have to be kind of unwieldy. And I know that some of our data sets appear that way when we're initially getting into them, but just the idea that we can use data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative data, in a variety of ways in order to improve our processes. And it can be the full component of an in-depth process improvement project, or it can be simply taking a look at one of the challenges that's currently going on and utilizing a tool like the Ishikawa diagram. So going back to your team and saying, you know what, this is something that we've really had a challenge with and that we're struggling with internally, and we know that we want to improve it. So let's take this staff meeting, take half of it, and work through this Ishikawa. So that we can kind of see these elements through different lenses and start to unpack what some of the other root causes might be that we haven't yet addressed.
Okay, good. All right, well, we are running out of time here. Megan, I want to thank you so much for this presentation. This was filled with so many insights. I know that, I would recommend to people, if you need to, go back and watch it again to make sure you don't want to miss this stuff. So again, Megan, thank you so much. And I want to thank our 2022 NextGen Partner Alliance for helping put on today's NextGen Summit. All right, before I send you on your way from this session, just a few quick reminders. Don't forget to fill out your CP evaluation in order to get that, to get that credit. And like I said earlier, we will email you the CPE as soon as we've got everything accounted for. And if you haven't already, please head over to the exhibit hall to check our amazing booths. You can find lots of additional information, a lot of really valuable resources. All right, but this day is not done yet. Up next, our closing session will begin at 3 p.m. Eastern, and you can access that through the conference hall in the main environment. The session will feature 2 keynote presentations. The first is Setting Effective Boundaries from Work Life to Home Life. And in this day and age of hybrid work, I know this is especially valuable. And the second is More Than a Cheerleader, How to Truly Inspire Your Team. And so that will be an inspiring way to end our day. So thank you all very much for attending, and we'll see you in the next session.